Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. It is another top 15 video, and man, when I first started this series, when I announced this series, oh, I'm gonna do top 15s and all that sort of stuff, I didn't realize how difficult it was gonna be, really narrowing it down. I think I went into it thinking that, oh, maybe I'll have a top 12 or a top 20, try to keep it different. But then I said to myself, I think I'm going to try to keep it uniform. I'm going to try to keep it at a top 15 because it provides more of a challenge. It's easier for me to make a top 25 list of best X-Men books or best Spider-Man books because there's plenty to pick from. But when you have to narrow it down to 15, you're like, oh my God, I got to cut out so many that might be like sacrilege to some fans, and understandably so. So yes, I'm keeping it at top 15, and man, this is getting harder and harder because as I was doing this one, the X-Men one, there were a few that I said, I gotta add this, add that, and had to cut them out. Okay, so before we go, again, I'll put the descriptions at the bottom, but I'm not going to keep going. This is 25, this is 24, this is 23, because I forget. Occasionally I'll throw a number in there. But I tried to keep it within X-Men. Now, books that are going to be excluded from this particular top 15, you're not going to see Incredible Hulk 181 because that's an Incredible Hulk book, even though Wolverine has everything to do with the X-Men. I want to try to keep it kind of condensed. Now, yes, giant size X-Men will be here because it's X-Men, but not going to see New Mutants 98. Those type of books, the Incredible Hulk 181, New Mutants 98, that might be a top X-Men character video. That's for the future down the line. But I'm just going to try to keep it top X-Men books, not X-Factor. So we're not going to see X-Factor or X-Force or anything like that. And I don't really have any of the newer X-Men stuff like Astonishing X-Men, New X-Men. So you're not going to really see that on this list. This is more of the old school, old books, more or less, type of video. X-Men number 39. Some may say, well, why is this on there? Well, this is the first time they changed their costumes, right? They went from those horrible, what was it, yellow and whatever the hell color it was, to this. And I thought that this was somewhat better. And I do think that this one, X-Men 39, tends to be more of a collectible X-Men because of that reason. Because, it's the first new costumes. And I do think it's important, at least to be a number 15 on this list. Next, we have X-Men number 129. This is the first appearance of Kitty Pryde, the White Queen, Sebastian Shaw. I think a lot of people would agree that this should be on a list of top X-Men books. Here's another one. I think this sometimes is a little underrated. X-Men number 28, the first appearance of the Banshee. Well, some may feel this about the Banshee, some may feel that about the Banshee. But he was in several of the Silver Age books, several Silver Age X-Men books. And he came back in giant size to be a full-fledged member of the X-Men for a number of years. And there were quite a few stories that surrounded Banshee. So yeah, he's definitely up there. And he was in a movie. He was in the X-Men First Class movie. Didn't make it to the other ones, but still important enough to be on this list, I think. I think this one's important. X-Men 95. This is the continuation from X-Men 94, where Thunderbird gets killed. I mean, who cares about Thunderbird? But it's still the first new team on their first mission continuing. It's continuing from X-Men 94. I almost thought I said giant size X-Men. No, that was a separate mission. But still, I think pretty important enough. Sunfire left in that issue too, I believe. Or did he leave in 94? I haven't read it in several years. He might have left in 94, so correct me in the comments if you want. And here's one that I've said many times that's completely underrated. You can't deny that this is probably a top X-Men book, even though it doesn't have the value behind it to be a top X-Men book. I think it still has the character value in the first full appearance of Gambit. Gambit is definitely one of the more popular X-Men that really has been abused and neglected over the years for many reasons. But I think now finally with the new X-Men books coming, that new X-Men films going to be coming out over the next 10 years, I think we're going to see Gambit, rightfully so. And maybe this book might go up, but definitely a top 15 worthy book. Here's another one. X-Men 54, the first appearance of Alex Summers. Now I know the 58 is a little bit more valuable because that's when he becomes Havoc, but still the introduction of Alex Summers and an underrated character, the Living Monolith, who was the Living Pharaoh. And that's definitely an underrated character, a character that would be interesting to see on the big screen to some extent down the line. Instead of always doing Magneto, Magneto, Magneto. Yes, we know Magneto does not always has a problem with the X-Men. Sometimes an ally, sometimes a friend. We've gotten that from the films, from the comics, from the cartoon, but it would be nice to see some change every now and then. X-Men number 50. Classic Jim Steranko cover. First appearance of Lorna Dane as Polaris. First monstrous X-Men logo. I think this is a classic for anybody that wants to collect X-Men, for sure. I mentioned this one before. I upgraded this. Oh, when did I upgrade this? Was it this year or last year? I don't know. But it's a nice crisp copy of X-Men number 58, the first full appearance of Havoc. Right? He showed up in 54 as Alex Summers, Cyclops' brother, and that's when he becomes Havoc. I think this is a very, very... Now we're starting to get to some really meaty ones. X-Men 14, the first appearance of the Sentinels. You can't go too far with the X-Men without running into, like I said before, Magneto, but also the Sentinels. And I've always liked the Sentinels. They're creepy, they're very fascist, and I think they epitomize all the fears of government or people in government persecuting others who are different. X-Men 101. First appearance of the Phoenix. We could all argue that Jean Grey was a shitty character from day one, and it wasn't until this book where she started to be taken seriously. She started to have more powers that have been felt throughout the entire Marvel universe, all the way to this date. Here's definitely another great book, X-Men number 12, first appearance of the Juggernaut. You still have the corniness about it that, he's Professor X's brother and his name just happens to be Cain, in reference to the biblical Cain and Abel, Cain being the bad brother. That's pretty stupid. But I still think the Juggernaut is a fearsome character, not just because he's so powerful. He's kind of creepy, especially when you read X-Men 12 right here. X-Men 12. And when you read when he comes back in X-Men 32, there's just a certain creepiness about him. He's not creepy in a macabre sense or in a ghostly zombie sense, horror movie sense, but there's like suspense with him where he's just creeping around, and then when he shows up, how do you fight him? He's just almost impossible to defeat unless you get that helmet off. X-Men 94. Man, I got to upgrade this book. Not a bad copy though, but definitely a big book when it comes to X-Men collecting. The first time that the new X-Men are in the series, and on top of that, this is the first issue where the X-Men had come back after a 5-year hiatus of just printing reprints from 1970 to 1975, and they came back with a vengeance. All right, we're at the last three. I think you could probably predict what at least the first two will be, but here's one. X-Men number 4. This is a classic book, not just for X-Men, but also for Avengers. With the first appearance of those characters, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Now, this is an important book, not just to X-Men, but to the Avengers. And it's the second appearance of Magneto, and one of the earlier X-Men books that is very sought out. When you're in single-digit X-Men's, of course, or any single-digit Marvel Silver Age, you're going to experience a bit of a price jump, of course, with the number 1. But when it gets to X-Men number 2, number 3, yeah, they're pricey, but not as pricey as when you get to number 4, and that hits you You know, X-Men number 3, I think, in an 8.0 is worth about, what, $1,500? An 8.0, that's not bad. But then when you get to an 8.0 X-Men number 4, the very next issue, you're hitting thousands of dollars. So, bit of a price jump, and one of the more desirable single-digit X-Men books. At number 2, of course, Giant Size X-Men number 1. Now, I know a lot of people like to say that Foom book is the first appearance of these new X-Men. In preview, perhaps, yeah. But the first appearance, traditionally in the comic book, it's Giant Size X-Men number 1. And I think this is still the more desirable book. Foom, was it Foom 10? I don't remember. I don't own it. I think that's more of a novelty. Just like Malibu Sun number, was it 13? First preview of Spawn. That's another novelty, cool novelty. You can argue that it's truly the first appearance of Spawn. I've mentioned that too. But I think when it comes to the comic book, I think, what would you rather have if you can't have both? If you can't get both, what would you rather have? Foom 10 or Giant Size X-Men number 1? I think the choice is fairly clear. And of course, number 1 on this list, if you're an X-Men fan, you probably, if you don't already, you probably want this book. X-Men number 1. As you know, I was able to upgrade to this copy last year. And it took a long time for me to get to this point. You know, I'm a big X-Men fan. X-Men is just under the EC books for me. It's EC, X-Men, and Spider-Man for me. And sometimes X-Men and Spider-Man fight for that number 2 spot. But those are the 3 most important series, for lack of a better word, in my comic book collecting. If there are ever books that are going to stay in my collection and that are going to constantly be upgraded to really pristine copies as best as I can, it will be from those 3. Pre-code EC horror books, X-Men books, and Spider-Man books. The others I could kind of either sell off or just let them stay where they're at. But really cool. And it took me a long time to get to this, starting from a coverless copy all the way to a 5.0. So those are my top 15 X-Men books, and I think, you know, some could be argued. You know, oh, is this really a top 15 book? But I think there are some that cannot be argued. And let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you, and take care.